Jan, did you want to come back up and talk a little bit about your experience in Flying V? As she mentioned, her family was actually one of the previous owners of the property that we're going to have tonight. So knowing that, we thought that she might be able to give a couple minute or two of insight before Forrest takes over and gives us his program this evening.
Thank you, David. So this was kind of a surprise. They said, oh, let us know what it was like when you were 5 or 6 at the Flying V Ranch. And so from that, I was like, the house seemed enormous. It was like huge when we were 5 years old, you know. So we called it the home. And we were the third family that lived there. And so it was from 1947. They actually, Fred and Marguerite bought it in 1942 for $140,000 from Ed and Beatrice Jordan. And so that was their home. They had a home in Denver, and they took a whole year to remodel the farm. And it was 180 acres. Actually, at that time, it was probably not as many acres, but he was a really good friend of the Phipps family. He would drive his horse Midas out there and visit with the Phipps all the time, and bought a bit more land from them. So Fred Eberhardt was largely self-taught mechanical engineer, and he came from an engineering family from New Jersey. Came to Colorado by train in 8th grade. Didn't finish any other schooling because he felt kind of harassed by his older brothers and his dad. And his aunt lived here, and they were in the silver mining industry. So he founded the Eberhardt Mechanical Company. They merged with the Denver Gearing Company, and they became Eberhardt Denver Company. So he designed and manufactured and designed gears, speed reducers, and more, and dozens of patents. His gears were used for the Hoover Dam, and all the sort of all the planes, all sorts of the tanks, all sorts of things. And this is how he made his millions. He did all his gears and speed reducers. So he was really amazing. And Fred was a pilot. He had his own plane. He flew out of, you'll hear more about this, but he flew out of Stapleton with his plane. But he was a pilot. He had this great Palomino horse. All of us as kids, the whole idea was just freedom and just fun. And so we would go out on the 180 acres with the dog Bonnie, who was she was just this amazing, took care of us, an Irish setter. And the Highland Canal was full of water at that time. So we had a power boat on the Highland Canal. A power boat, can you imagine that? A power boat. And there was a lake, so we fished in the lake. But the big power boat, and then there was the banks of that. We had a big rope swing, and we just dropped into the Highland Canal. So you would never let children do that in this day and age. But there was lots of farm animals and a caretaker house. Some people thought that was an original house. That was a caretaker's house just across the bridge, and Jerry and Danny and Jean, younger like us, lived there. And then, Fred had out along with the Phipps family. There were great garden parties at the farm, 4th of July, and those were really special. Fred would fill up a water trough with oysters, and the guests would enjoy great food, oysters, and champagne. So we had a lot, and the Firebirds were like, to die for. So the interior of the house was really quite incredible. So we had downstairs a big country kitchen, and then the produce with the root cellar, and then this root cellar under the house. Big great room and dining room, big fireplace. And then across was Fred's office and later a bedroom after he suffered a massive heart attack and he really couldn't go upstairs. In that area and upstairs was a hidden room, and you're going to hear more about this, and these through a bookshelf. And these were these rooms used by the previous owners in the Prohibition days and the Mafia days. And they were behind bookshelves in Fred's time. There was also a phone downstairs and upstairs so that Marguerite could check on Fred. And the screen porch out there is where we ate, played cards, and did a lot on Sundays. And upstairs to the right, that's where one of the secret rooms was. And at the back, at the very end, there was where the twin boys' rooms was, big bear rug. I thought that bear was going to come alive and come to eat us. And so it was very, very cool place to grow up, and so much happened there with what happened previously and then during Fred's era. So we give it to our speaker for the evening. But we had a magical time growing up there, and I hope other people can enjoy the house. One of two historic structures in Highlands Ranch.
Getting interference? Oh, Sarah's going to use it. Go ahead, Sarah.
Okay, specifically with the feedback, so we'll be ready to turn down that. I feedback gave last meeting that might take place.
Forrest Dykstra, son-in-law of Jim Tepper, who was the father of Highlands Ranch, has lived in Highlands Ranch since 1982. And one of the first homes in this planned community. Forrest worked for the Highlands Ranch Metro District Public Works Department as project manager from 1986 until his retirement last September. He was involved in many public works projects throughout Highlands Ranch, including the Highlands Ranch Mansion and improvement projects in the Flying Bee Park. Through his wife, Diane, he got to know the Bowens, the last family who lived in the Flying Bee home. They spent many enjoyable hours visiting the Bowens there. Thank you. Please welcome Forrest Dykstra.
Oh, they'll come back.
Still working? 1, 2? 9, 10? There we go. Okay, good. I'm in a lot of practice since I retired last September. I haven't had many presentations, so bear with me if I wear out and lose my place and forget what I'm doing. So, and also, Jan did a wonderful job. I learned a lot of things from what she just said that I didn't know about. So, she also took about half the presentation away, so I don't need You'll only get 150 slides instead of 200, so we're good. Those are the Flying Bee house and farmhouse and park. Okay, everybody said, who doesn't know where it's at? Okay, so we'll go through this. Here we go. So, just the farmhouse. This property tells the extraordinary history of a number of residents and families in northern Douglas County. Some notable people, but also it kind of exemplified the family, dedication to family, dedication to hard work, and involvement in the community. You see that throughout all of the owners in one way, shape, or form. So it's good. So it's, like Jan mentioned, it's one of the few historic farmhouses residences left.
The mic up higher, we can't hear you.
Talk louder? Got it. Okay. Okay. So, Flying Bee Ranch is located in the northwest corner of Highlands Ranch. Originally, it was not part of the Highlands Ranch plan development, but as you'll see further on, it got included. It's pretty much where C-470 and Highway 85 is, where the big flyover goes and goes over the property there. So this is an aerial view of the property that the Bowen family owned when Crest purchased the property in 2004. So you can see McClellan Reservoir is on the kind of on the north end. C-470 kind of cuts through the property, and we'll talk about the impact of that as well. Then a little closer, the Highland Canal goes through the property as well, which you'll see is very important in the history of the Flying Bee Ranch and the operations that went on there in terms of the agricultural and the farming and the ranching that went on there. So you can see the red is the outline of the property there. So this is what it looked like in 1955. Jan's family probably had it at that time. And you can see it was pretty much open field. We had, well, back up here. There we go. Wrong one again. There we go. We had ponds here, another pond here, a couple of ponds here. They're kind of hard to see in the black and white photo, but you can see the Highland Canal that goes through. The Highland Canal was built in the late 1800s to deliver water to various areas of Metro Denver. Mind you guys, wait, can you see? Okay. So, the first owner, the original owner of the property was Fred Johnson. He bought it from the Colorado Mortgage and Investment Company for $2,150. Original property was 80 acres, and he came to the area because he suffered from the gold fever that was inflicting many other people that came to the Denver area in the late 1800s. He invested in multiple Douglas County mining properties in the southwestern part of the county, but he sold it. He only had it for 18 months. He sold it to Matthew Plews in 1906. So Matthew Plews was the first owner, built the original house, born in 1871 in Darlington, England, came to the U.S. at age 18, and as you can see, he was a farmer, groundskeeper, landscape. He was extraordinary in that respect, kind of the Johnny Appleseed of southern Arapahoe and northern Douglas counties. This is a clipping from a newspaper, and it reads, Mr. Matt Plews, for 12 years, the landscape gardener of Walhurst, recently resigned to embark on truck gardening for himself. This was going to become the Flying Bee Ranch. He purchased a tract of land just east and adjoining Walhurst, which is on the other side of Santa Fe, and built a modern home, and also erected 200 feet of greenhouses, which are packed with growing vegetables, which supplies the daily wants of those. So here's a picture of the original house. This was built in the early 1900s. This view is from, I think it's from the south, so you can see this is the front of the house as we see it now. The greenhouses were here. I think this is the Highland Canal that cuts through the property. You can see in the early 1900s, we had a lot of the big cottonwood trees that are growing along the canal that took advantage of the water from the canal when it was being used. So this picture is kind of looking to the northeast. And this is a view from the other side, kind of looking to the southwest. You can see the silo in the back here on this side. So this is again a newspaper clipping from the Littleton Independent 1908. Mr. Williams has an ideal garden spot, an ample supply of water, and has additional plans under consideration for the enlargement of the already equipped houses. Anyone desiring plants of spring vegetation will be able to secure the best on the market from him who's around Littleton. This was his first love. He enjoyed landscaping, he enjoyed vegetable gardening, and he actually supplied a lot of the restaurants and homes in Littleton. So here's his business card. Everything for a hardy garden. This is a picture of his family. You can see all I'm going to say it's a Model A or Model T, or whatever. So he was also, you'll see that again, you'll see this theme running throughout all of the residents and owners of the property. They're involved in their community. He was a member of the school board, and kid treasurer, and he's one dad along to the school, which was great. So they were very, very thankful and fortunate to have him on the staff as a landscape gardener. And this was the record journal of Douglas County in 1918. So this is after he'd been here a little over 10 years. This is a picture of him and I'm guessing his daughter in a handcart, probably the Littleton Cemetery based on the size of the tree. And again, he worked for the Littleton Cemetery as their landscaper and maintenance gardener, and took care of the grounds there for many years, and added many of the improvements that are still there today, of course. So again, this is a newspaper clipping from the Record Journal of 1922 in Douglas County. Yeah, these are probably the evergreen trees that were in the previous picture, some of the spruce trees that were there. So you can see how well kept and well planned the cemetery is. So he won many awards at Douglas County Fairs, best 10 years of swathing corn, had apples, Jonathan, Baby Bush, Blackman. A lot of those apple trees are actually still on the property. He had an orchard that he watered from the Highland Canal, kind of in the north, and you'll see some of the later aerials, we'll see some of those, the rows in the orchard. And some of those apple trees and pear trees may still be there. He had plums, which of course turned into prunes. So at age 65, though, he decided to hang it up, and he sold the property, the height of depression, to Elizabeth Hamlin for $60,000. She was the mother-in-law, and I did see some documentation that she may have been the wife of Charlie Stevens, but for now we're going to continue to say she was his mother-in-law. So Matthew Plews died on January 6, 1946, and his wife died December 1958. So lived a full, long life. This is in the Littleton Cemetery. So now on to smiling Charlie Stevens, one of the more notable owners of the property. They were gangsters, just call them what he was born in 1892, married Nellie Hamlin, so I guess Elizabeth Hamlin was his mother-in-law. Operated the Blakeland Inn, which again is on the other side of Santa Fe. And he was connected with the Smaldone brothers and convicted of car bombing his partner Leo Barnes in 1937. So kind of a notable character. So one thing he did do, though, is he acquired an additional 120 acres from Frank Kissler, who was the owner of Highlands Ranch at that time. During the Depression in the mid-1930s, the Depression was going on, and the Kissler Farm, Diamond K Ranch at that time, was struggling. And there were some things that he had some setbacks. So he sold the additional 120 acres, which is the area outlined to include kind of the west 120 acres of the ranch. So the ranch property expanded from 80 to 120 acres. And so bounded by the railroad on the west side, and by County Line Road on the north, and then the section boundaries on the south. So the original 80 acres is the section, the long narrow section on the east, on the right, and then the blue outlined area was the additional 120 acres he bought. When he bought that 120 acres and decided to move out to this way, he did do some improvements. He extended County Line Road, which up here, at that time there was one phone line in County Line Road, and 8 families had to share it. So, who remembers growing up on the party line? Yeah, I had them too. I remember it was okay, we got to make sure our neighbors aren't on the phone. So, they had one phone line went down where the County Line Road was going to go. I knew that. But Charlie, because he had some other business interests going on, he needed a few more phone lines. You can't take bets on only one party line. So, he added 8 phone lines and also got electric extended to the property. Early on, they just had kind of a light plant for the electrical, but Charlie extended the property. I can't imagine how long it would take Xcel Energy to extend gas or electric to the property, or somebody to extend phone lines now. So those are some of the improvements that he made while they owned the property. He was incarcerated in the state penitentiary for car bombing. 1939, 1944, it seems kind of short. Sold the property to his nephew Eddie Jordan at the time of Elizabeth Hamlin's death in 1943, and then he sold it to Fred Eberhardt in 1944. So that kind of ends Charlie's involvement with the property. But we'll go on a little bit of history. He sold the farm, like I mentioned, in 1944 and purchased the Woolhurst property, which is kitty corner, kind of on the, I'm going to call it on the southeast corner of on the west side of Santa Fe. This was the big inn that they had that is actually burned down in later years. He died at 73 at his home on South Santa Fe Drive on November 14, 65. He'd been charged with car bombings, conspiracy to commit murder, tax evasion, and armed robbery. So today, his house is the Colorado State Parks office, which is at that on that. Called the south side of C470, where State Parks office is at. So the Eberhardts bought the farm in 1944. You've heard a lot of this from Jan, so I'll kind of go through these slides kind of quick and make sure we have time for questions or comments at the end here. So a lot of this, Jan mentioned, left his home in New Jersey at 16, arrived in Denver in 1910. Didn't attend high school or college, which is amazing that he became the mechanical engineer that he did. Back then, a lot of that was self-taught, and it's a pretty amazing accomplishment they did. And again, like I said, you'll see some of that, you'll see that theme throughout all the owners of the property. His wife, Marguerite, was born in 1895, was a gold miner's daughter in Cripple Creek, graduated from East High School and Colorado Women's College. They were married in 1950, Shirley was 1917, and he started the machine works in 1925. So there's a picture of Fred, Marguerite, and Shirley. And then a lot of this Jan talked about. Made gears, merged with Denver Iron Works, and formed Eberhardt Denver. Numerous patents for speed-reducing worm gears in aircraft guns, radar units, and aircraft wings and tails. And of course, the Hoover Dam gearing and things too, which is a pretty amazing accomplishment for someone who didn't go to high school or college. Here's some of the family gatherings that Jan mentioned and some of the wonderful times they've had. You can see they had a great time with the family.
That's me in there.
What's that? Which one are you, Jan?
That's me in there, the littlest one.
Right?
The little girl, right there. Yeah.
Right there?
That's me.
Here we go. Anybody else have a picture of when they were 2 or 3? All right. There is the motorboat on the canal.
Yeah.
Obviously, they ran a lot more water through the canal than they have the last few years, since you can get an outboard motor on there. But and the rope swing and things. The canal would typically only run April through October, so it wasn't an all-year thing. And this time, obviously, had more water than they did have back then. So I guess the ditch rider never caught you guys, Jan, messing around in the canal, because later on, the ditch riders would come there if you were on the canal property or in the canal, they'd kick you out pretty quick.
That's right.
So the company grew, enlarged quite a bit, and had over 160 distributors across the country. Sold the board one in 1956.
Yeah.
Received as honored as one of the 10 outstanding leaders in the field by the American Society of Mechanical Engineers in 1968. What an accomplishment. Something to be very proud of. Do you guys still have that award, Jan, somewhere in the house?
Yes, we do.
We do. That's awesome. It's absolutely awesome. Okay, so now we may take the next step in the history of the Flying V Ranch. Gates Rubber wanted to purchase the area kind of known as South Park, which is the area north of County Line Road and west of Broadway, kind of up to Mineral. There are a lot of buildings in there now. But Gates wanted to purchase that whole section of property for the new plant. And previously, when they had property farther in Denver, kind of where I-25 crosses Broadway, they had a holdout. One of the property owners there, bar owner, held out, so they were not able to get all the property that they wanted. So they said, okay, we've learned our lesson. We're not going to close on all of this property until we get everything that we want. Well, the Bowen family, by this time, Johnny and his dad and their families owned about 80 acres, which is at the corner of County Line and Broadway. The very last bit of the property that Gates wanted to get. So they were negotiating with the Bowens, and Johnny and his dad said, well, we want $500,000 for these 80 acres. Gates said, that's a little bit more than what we want to pay. I'll tell you what, we'll go down the road. We'll pay $400,000 for the Flying V property, the Eberhardt Ranch, and we'll trade property. Now, this was a good deal for everybody involved because Gates got their 80 acres, paid $100,000 less. The Bowens gave up their 80 acres and got almost 200 acres. So it was a good deal for when the Eberhardt family wanted to move back to California. So Gates then bought the property at the 400 and traded with the Bowen family. And then they moved back to California. Jan, I'm going to ask you a question. Did they enjoy living in California and they kind of wanted to move back there and would spend just summers here?
Yes. So, Fred suffered a massive heart attack. That's why he had to sell to Borg Warner in '56. So it was a lot better altitude-wise to live in California.
Okay. So did everybody hear that? They moved back to California. He had a heart attack in 1956, and the elevation here was kind of restrictive in that respect, so they wanted to move back to California. So, and Jen did mention they had a plane. They did not ever fly the plane here on Flying B. From what I understand, it was assessed that the plane was a little bit too big for the runways that we had there. It came back Stapleton Airport. So, we've changed owners one more time. So, this is a picture of Johnny Bowen. They owned the property from 1967 to 2004. And this is the original sign that was on County Line when I moved to Denver in 1981, and we would go down County Line Road and we'd visit them in the early 80s. This was the sign that was along County Line Road.
When did that sign go away? Because I'm trying to remember.
I want to say it probably disappeared in about 2005 or 2006 after Harrison bought the properties. I'm not totally sure of that, but I want to say that. We'll get there. We'll get there. Good question. The question was how did they get the name? We'll get there. So, yeah. So let's see. So Bowens had a long history in Douglas and Arapahoe counties. Johnny's family had moved here in the Denver area. His father and grandparents moved here in the early 1980s. And they'd been farming and acquiring property in Arapahoe on Ridge Road, the Arapahoe Douglas counties along County Line Road up to University. They actually had some of the property that was now under McClellan Reservoir. That was the original homestead. And they exchanged with the city of Englewood, and they actually moved some of the homes from there onto the Flying B property. So, John was the oldest. He was 16 years older than his next brother, George, and then Martin was a couple of years younger than that. Martin became actually a school teacher in Douglas County, and I think he was a pretty good wrestler based on some of the stories I've heard. So here's a picture of John. You can see he was much older that's George on the left and Martin on the right. So John always said he was more of a father to him, and his dad was more of a grandfather to him just because of the age difference. But they had some pretty good stories, and you can imagine with 3 boys what it was probably like roughhousing in the house. I've got 4 grandsons, so I can kind of envision what it looks like when they get going. So Katie's family was also longtime residents of Castle Rock. Her grandfather was a Mason, immigrated from Germany, and they lived at the foot of the butte on the west side of Castle Rock, off of Wolfensberger. He actually helped build the Old Stone Church. Who's familiar with the Old Stone Church in Castle Rock? Yeah, he was actually one of the Masons for that building. It's no longer a church, but Katie grew up and played the organ in the church there and everything else. So Katie graduated from Douglas County High School in 1946, and she went to work for the Soil Conservation Service at that time, and that's where Johnny met her. He was encouraged by, I don't know if it was his dad or his mom, but they said, you gotta go meet this girl. So he went and found an excuse to go to the Soil Conservation office and asked some questions about some property, and she wanted a 7-year engagement time. And I think he wanted a 7-day engagement time. They compromised and were actually married after about 6 months. So they were heavily involved in Douglas County, and were just a lot of people have been involved politically as well. So they had the properties there then. So Johnny and Katie got married. They moved up to the properties here north of County Line Road, and they continued to live there and farm there. Well, it was getting a little tougher, and some of the canal didn't have the water that it always needed in the 50s. So Johnny and his dad says, well, we got an opportunity to buy a ranch up in Strasburg. So they bought 2,200 acres up in Strasburg. It was a wheat farm at the time. And they said, hey, ladies, gals, we're going to move up to Strasburg. And Katie and Johnny's mom said, wrong, we're not moving. So they had to figure out something. So Johnny had learned to fly before this. He had an interest in airplanes, and it's a whole interesting story on how he became a pilot and learned all that. So the girls said, nope, we're not moving, so you guys have to figure something out. So Johnny and his dad would fly up there and then fly back at 5 in the morning and fly back at night. So it worked out really well for them. And so he became a pilot even before he bought the Flying B Ranch. So this is actually, now it's time for our refreshments. the actual landing right that they had on the fence on Flying V. When Crest bought the property and the Bowen family moved, one of our staff collected it, and he retired and passed it on to one of our other staff, but then retired and passed it on to me, and I took it with me when I retired. So that's a photo of that. So this was actually on the fence line to make sure that Johnny didn't land in the water plant or on C-470 or in Cleveland Reservoir. So, but Katie would turn the lights on at midnight when he'd be coming back. So
Where was the lighting straight?
coming up. So there's Johnny and Katie. They were two of the nicest people I've ever met. Family was important to them. They had 4 children, and we'll see that in the next slide. But whenever we were out to visit them, they were always pleasant and very just really, really good and kind people. They were, like I said, very active in Douglas County and Littleton. Katie was involved in a lot of the fair goings on, and she taught classes for manners, the debutante classes and things like that. And she was actually on the planning commission when Highlands Ranch got the approval, when Michigan got the planning approval, zoning approval for Highlands Ranch. And the head of the planning department at that time said, Katie, we got to make sure we do this right. And I think she was wise enough to see the future of what development was going to happen in the metro area on this, and she made sure they did it right. And the Michigan company complied with a lot of their requests and went through a lot of the hoops that they required and did a lot of groundwork to develop Highlands Ranch. And they finally got their positive reaction to it from Littleton and from Douglas County. So, but Katie was on the planning commission when that was approved, and I think that's part of the relationship that my in-laws and the Michigan staff had with Johnny and Katie. Was they said, we'll work together with you and get a good product here, which we ended up with. So, named the property the Flying V Ranch. We still have the cattle ranch near Strasburg, so they would still continue to fly back and forth. And they had 4 children. Daniel, Christine, David, and Catherine. I know that Christine and Catherine or Katie still live in the metro area or Colorado Springs area. Daniel had the ranch in Strasburg for a while, but last I heard he moved to Nebraska. And I'm not sure where. I think David's in the metro area as well. I'm not sure. But their extended family lived on the ranch. You can see in this photo here that they had multiple homes on here. So as Johnny's parents and as Katie's parents got older, and as the kids grew older and got married, they all were living at one point in time on the ranch. So at one point in time, they had 7 different homes there for in-laws and kids on there. So the kids would get married, leave, and come back and actually live on there for a while. So that was the importance of family. You can see that in all the kids and grandkids. My son actually went to junior high with one of their grandchildren as well, and you can see how important family was to them. So, Flying V operations, again, I mentioned the Highline Canal earlier and how important it was to the operations of it. So, Highline Canal came through the property, and at one point in time they had 6 different stock ponds on the property where they would hold water throughout the winter. They would get the water from the canal during this irrigation season, like I said, which was April through October. And they had the ponds here. Before C-470 came through, obviously everything kind of drains to the north here. This pond here came off of a head gate off the canal right in this area. And these ponds came off head gate right here. And then there was another head gate kind of where Plaza Drive comes through now that took care of these properties. Or these ponds, filled these ponds. So they would dry up and when I first got to know Johnny and Katie, they would let us fish this pond here, and we had some good times fishing that pond there with my kids and my family. One year he says, hey, if you're going to fish there, can you catch a few of the fish out of the pond here up in the north, and bring this pond had dried up and the fish had died. He says, so can you move some fish over? We said, sure, we'd be glad to help you out. So Johnny called it the best little cattle ranch in Colorado, and I'm going to read an excerpt from an interview he did with Susie Appleby, who wrote a history of the Flying V. And this is what John said. The Flying V was the best little cattle ranch in Colorado. The reason was because it had loads of water. There weren't as many people around then, and I saw the Highline Canal from 1st of May to the 1st of October. There isn't that kind of water anymore. There was also 6 or 7 lakes on the place. Never had to chop ice for your cattle in the wintertime because there was always warm water coming out of the bottom of those lakes. Didn't have to worry about your cattle getting a drink. It had loads of hay, marvelous irrigation system. You could turn the head gates water on at the north end of the place, and by maneuvering the water, you could have the same water running out under the underpass on Highway 85. So you can see the importance of it, and they were able to manage that the watering system quite well to be able to serve their ranch and grow their hay and their cattle. So Katie also loved the garden. She had a greenhouse here. This picture was taken after they moved out, so the greenhouse is in a little bit of disrepair, but I can remember we'd go visit. She had the largest rhubarb plants I'd ever seen, and flowering irises and raspberries and asparagus, and there's still some wild asparagus growing along the canal there in places if you want to take a walk and try to find that someday. But we actually, in my yard, I still have some of the irises that she gave us that still bloom, so we still have a memory of them in our yard here. She called the property her Shangri-La. She absolutely loved it there. It's a great place to raise a family and raise the kids. Good work ethic. They had all the different livestock, the chickens and the cows and that. So yes. So like I mentioned, they depend on the Highline Canal for the water. When the Highline Canal was running full, they'd get a little over 2 CFS, cubic feet per second, to irrigate and fill the ponds. Now this is one of the diversions that they had here off the canal. You can see the pipe here would come off the canal, and then they had a series of ditches, and the ditches would go to the pond here, which was actually, this pond here was behind the house here in that photo there. If you see at the end of the dock here, you had an irrigation pump, and you would use that to water Katie's garden. So water was very important to them, and they recognized the importance of that. I'm going to back up just a second. One of the other interesting side notes on this is this irrigation bypass here kind of went through a ditch here, and then by the house they had a little, I'm going to call it a concrete pond. It wasn't much bigger than 4 or 5 feet across, and they had goldfish that they would raise there. And every year they'd bring the goldfish in at the end of the season before winter started, and then bring them back out in the spring. One year the goldfish had babies, and they had a ton of babies. So we were out there, and they said, "You want some goldfish?" And we said, "Sure, we'll take a few goldfish." Well, they gave us 18 of them. So fortunately, we had a big tank at home that the kids loved the aquarium we had. So we raised their goldfish, and one of them would be bigger than all the rest of them. We called him Samson. So next spring rolled around, we bring the goldfish back out there, and then we expected to get our goldfish back at the end of the summer and bring them back and put them in our tank. And we went out there, and Katie kind of showed up with a sad face, and she says, "A raccoon got into our pond. We don't have any goldfish now." So we had a lot of livestock on the pond there. So yeah, so again, here's the importance of the canal in irrigation. You can see the remnants of the orchard right in this area where Matthew Plews had the orchard. And there was actually a diversion ditch that came off of the kind of the southwest side of this pond and ran this way and watered the orchards over there. There's still remnants of the orchard there, and the Metro District is trying to put some additional of the fruit trees back in there and kind of reestablish that orchard to show the history of the property. So, let's see. So in the Highline Canal. I mentioned the Highline Canal. We could spend an hour talking about the Highline Canal and its history as well. The Highline Canal Conservancy is trying to preserve that history, so if you'd like more information on the Highline Canal and its history, that'd be a good place to check their website, the Highline Canal Conservancy. So I don't want to say unfortunately, Denver Water no longer uses it to transport water. It leaked more than it transported, so they said in the interest of being more efficient with our water usage, we can't afford to send water down the canal because more of it goes into the ground and out the sidewalls than we get at the end of it. So. Okay, why is it called Flying B? Good question here. He had 2 runways here. You can see north-south runway here and kind of the east-west runway here. So this is the Highlands Ranch water plant. So this fence line kind of in between here is where these landing lights were, so that Johnny didn't land in the water plant. So that's where the runways were in early years of development of Missionville. Some of the staff from Missionville would get a call occasionally, hey, we just saw a plane crash. No, we didn't have a plane crash. It was Johnny and his plane flying off and taking off over a county line or over C-470 there. Once C-470 went in, he was a lot closer to C-470 than he was to County Line Road. But we heard many stories of, hey, we just saw a plane go down there. Yeah, we know. So here are the hangars. This is again after the property had been sold, so the weeds have grown up and they're a little bit of disrepair. But at one point in time, he had 5 to 7 planes. They weren't all his; they were friends of his. But he had a number of different planes in there, so kind of cool that they had that. So hence the name Flying Bee, the Flying Bowens. So yes, we were going to get there. So original sign, Flying Bees. So as time goes on, as we all know, changes begin to occur. And they were wise enough, and I think Katie being on the planning commission saw the development occurring in Douglas County, particularly in northern half, when Missionville acquired property in the late 70s and began their planning process. And they were part of that, but they recognized that it was coming. And really, even though they felt really bad about it, they didn't really resent it too much. They recognized progress was coming. C-470 came through the property in 1984. I'm going to read again something that Katie said in her interview with Susie Appleby. In Susie's book, it says Katie describes the impact of the death knell in life as they had known in reference to C-470. And here's what she had to say. I don't think words can describe it. It's very sad. I mean, with time, we actually managed to become somewhat used to the highway, and I don't know what they would be able to do without it, that road today, because it's such a vital way to get people across town. And that's the wisdom that Katie had in terms of recognizing the future and development that was coming. No one had given us any idea that it was going to happen. In the short time that we were there before they started the C-470 construction, you could look out from our house and the sunset over the lake was just exquisite. And what replaced it was a bunch of roaring cars going by there. So it was very sad for them at that time in 85 when C-470 went through. And they'd only been there less than 20 years by that time. So it does seem like a short time to them at that time. And having visited them out there before and after C-470, I could see the impact the noise from C-470 was pretty significant. But they dealt with it, accepted it, didn't resent it, but recognizing that it was coming. And in 1988, like I said earlier, Flying Bee, the property was really not part of the original Highlands Ranch development. But in 1988, Missionville wanted to rezone the property and add some additional dwelling units, and they approached the Bowens and said, would you like to be included in this process, which would give you zoning for this and save them a lot of time and effort. Bowens have been good neighbors to Missionville and Highlands Ranch, and obviously Katie's impact on the planning commission was deeply appreciated by the Missionville company staff. So the Bowens said, yes, that makes good sense at this time. Increases the value of our property pretty significantly. So they were included in the 1988 rezoning of Highlands Ranch. So in 2004, Erickson purchased the property for $23 million. Does anybody know what Mission paid for all of Highlands Ranch in 79 or 80? What?
26 million.
Yeah, about the same price. Yeah.
The first time, the owners were paying 13.
Right, exactly. So they purchased the property at about that for the same cost that the Bowens got for their 200 acres. They got 22,000 acres. So you can see the Bowens again saw the handwriting on the wall. They could see the future and said, yes, the property is going to become very valuable. They had actually established a family corporation where all the family members had shares. So they were very, very caring for family and didn't leave anybody out, and all the family members had shares. Johnny's brother George was actually killed in a plane crash in Libya, so I'm not sure where his shares went, but the family shares would go down and made sure the kids had it, and his brother Martin had shares, and when at one point in time, Martin could have sold the property for about $100,000, but he decided to keep it. And when Crest came, or Erickson came along and bought it, he got millions for it. So it was a good decision to keep the property. So a lot of this information that I've given you, and there's a lot more information, is an oral history that Johnny and Katie did. It's on the Douglas County Library archive site. So it's about a 2-hour interview. So if you've got time to listen to it, and it would be good to listen to it if you're really interested in it. They're wonderful people, and just to hear the stories they tell, and on that is pretty interesting. So 2004, Erickson bought the property and developed Crest retirement communities. This is where the development has occurred. This is the very south end of the property. On the right side here is the golf course. I actually think that's the water plant in that area, but this is the most recent development here. So, and then the area around the house here, that we showed earlier, around the house and the ponds, was conveyed to the Metro District in 2006 by the Erickson Development Company as part of their commitment to open space and parks that's required by Douglas County planning documents. Is they have to dedicate open space, so they dedicated this property to the Metro District for a park. It's about, the property itself, right around the ranch house or farmhouse is about 6 acres, and then they also dedicated additional tract on the very west end where there's another pond that's about 3 to 4 acres. So the district got about 10 acres from Erickson for this and for the park. So the district developed the park. 2006 and went through the planning process, had a lot of planning. Jan, I think you were part of some of that early planning maybe?
Yes.
On that, yeah.
Yeah.
And what are we
got
going to do?
to knock the house down. In 2010, we lobbied for that.
Right, so yeah, one of the big things, challenges was what to do with the house. So initially they were going to do some renovation to the house. They got into it and found some structural issues, so they put the house improvements, development, redevelopment work on hold, but they did build a shelter and a fishing dock around the pond. We worked so we now water the pond year round. I say we, my former employer. There's the pond in winter with ice on it. This is their old root cellar, and there's shelves in there, but we boarded it up now to keep people out of it. And new sign for the park. This is the entrance off of Plaza Drive. So in 2014, we said, okay, let's start working on the house. And we went through an assessment, and we said, okay, the house needs some work structurally. So we stabilized it with structural steel. You can see the steel beams that were inserted in the building. We call it a toaster slice. We cut gaps in the slices in the roof of the building. The roof was in bad shape, so we really didn't do any damage, and we dropped these into there, tied them all together, and pretty much fastened the outside of the building to the steel to stabilize the building. And then put new siding on it and new windows, replaced the windows that had been broken and the old style windows. But pretty much put the house, at least the outside of the house, back to where it was. Oh, I must have missed the slide here. There's a story I got to tell here somewhere. And, oh, right here. I went over this one. When Erickson gave the property to the district, there were a few other houses on the property that they'd used for offices. They'd torn down a few of the old houses already. And then as part of their last bit of commitment, they said, we asked that they tear down the houses that we weren't going to use and leave this one. Well, the loader operator, I don't know if he didn't know his left from his right, but fortunately he went out and he stuck his bucket, the loader bucket, right into this side of the house. Fortunately, one of the Erickson staff happened to be leaving their office just on the other side and saw it, stopped him before he did any more damage. But you can see he took out that section of the very east end of the house. If it had been 10 or 15 minutes later, it had been completely gone. So one of the idiosyncrasies, I call it, of this project. So like I said, the shelter and parking and trail and pond were done in 2010, and then in 2014 we did the rest of the housework and kind of put it on hold again. At one point in time, there was a full proposal and recommendation to do different things, but we kind of put it on hold when we started working on our senior center. Said, okay, we've got enough going on with our staff and work going on. We're going to put the park improvements on hold and until we finish the senior center. Now that's done. We've decided to, my former employer has engaged a consultant. They're going through that process now and are working with the consultant to come up with some conceptual plans what to do with the house and the park. And they're in that process. Right now, the schedule is to present that in May, it may be June, but in talking to the Metro District staff, that's the process that they're going through. So credits, most of this presentation, Nancy, Elis, and Edward put together. Jan did half of it for me, thank you, Jan. I had a Jim, I didn't know we were going to do that. Susie Appleby, I used her history of flying me in interviews with the Bowens on that. Jeff Case, who was our former director of public works, took a lot of the photos that I used. The Highlands Ranch Metro District, we also had some photos in the Douglas County Library oral interview. And I kind of want to close with how they felt about the property here. And this kind of really tells the Bowen family history and outlook on life. And this was Johnny and really how it's feeling. The ranch actually sacrificed itself for the good of their family. Like I mentioned, they set up a corporation and all the family had shares. So, and this is his quote to Susan. That place did something for us, I think, that was very unusual. When we bought the place, it was a home, and it sacrificed itself for us. When C-470 we went through, we received a payment from the state for that, and that benefited the family. But as the years went by, the ranch couldn't generate enough money to pay our expenses. How can you keep cattle when there's a freeway going through your property? Then the canal path got opened up. A lot of people were walking down the path. Sometimes our cattle would get out on the path and people would see a calf and say, oh, I think I'll go pet that lonely calf. Anybody have a ranching background? You're going to go pet that lonely calf? And he said, the thing is, cows don't tolerate that very well. We were always worried somebody was going to get hurt. It changed. Then C-470 came through, and right around the same time Highlands Ranch was sold. His timing was a little bit off, actually. C-470 came through about 5 or 6 years after the Highlands Ranch was sold. And Highlands Ranch was sold and bought by the developers, and that made a great change too. At one point, we had 7 easements across the property. Every time you turned around, somebody was surveying there to take something away from the place. But what all that did was made that place very, very much more valuable. Not as a ranch, not as a home, but it changed the complexion of it. You've got to realize that when we finally sold the place, look at the opportunity that gave the family. All those things were a direct benefit from the ranch. It was very, very good to us. It gave us not only a wonderful place to raise a family, but it sent all of our kids and our grandkids toward a much better life than they would have had if we had been living someplace else. So I say that ranch sacrificed itself for us. So to finish, to wrap up what Susie had in her little book, John Bowen is correct in assuming his beloved Flying Bee Ranch possessed a lifelike consciousness that ultimately led to its own sacrifice. Perhaps the property attained this quality from the liveliness and vitality of its rich history and past owners. Despite the differences in personalities, from the dreamer Fred Johnson, to the responsible Matthew Plews, to the risk-takers Charlie Stevens and Edward Jordan, to the devoted family couple Fred and Marguerite Eberhardt, to the loyal John and Katie Bowen, the cozy ranch along the Highland Canal represented one clear purpose. It was their own. We're talking about different stories, but I'll see if I can answer it.
We talked about the orchard and that there were still some of the apple trees, etc. Do you know if they're labeled by species?
They are not, to my knowledge, at this time.
That would
And I think there's probably been a lot of cross-pollination and stuff, and I don't know that the original species are
Well,
there.
the apple trees would be really important to know.
Okay, you might ask give the Metro District arborist staff, tree care staff, forestry staff a call and see if they know about it.
Okay.
But they might be able to answer that question. I don't think so, but I don't know for sure.
Could you talk about the festival cattle ranch? Could you talk about the cattle and how many they had, whether cowboys that worked it? I did see pictures of farms there that they had. So the cattle operation.
Yeah, they would usually have the cattle on site during the spring through the summer and into the fall, and then they'd run the cattle back up to the ranch in Strasbourg. And that's because they could graze the cattle because of the grass that grew there because of the irrigation from the canal. So if I remember correctly, they typically run a couple of hundred head, and it was primarily Holsteins. They were dairy cows, and they'd been dairy farmers all along. They actually sold to Safeway Corporation for many years, but they would run a few hundred head up there and milk the cows themselves. The story that Johnny told, and it'll be in the oral history, is that one of the farmers farther up north, or dairy farmers farther up north along Ridge Road, didn't care for his cows, but he had a pretty good bloodline of Holsteins. But he wouldn't care for his cows, and they'd get mastitis and then not be able to milk as well. So they would get the cows from him, but then they would breed them and they have their own, which were a very good bloodline, very good milk producers. So he was kind of crafty in that respect and a good businessman in that respect. But I think they never ran more than 100 to 150, maybe as many as 200 cows on the ranch that I can remember.
I remember driving by there and seeing these cute little like horse swings that were made out of tires. Was that the Bowens doing that?
I don't know, but that would be I do remember those tires, and they were their Jan can maybe answer if they were there by her family or.
That's right, yeah. So we were really famous for the tire swings because with all the water, I mean, that was the most fun thing we had from the banks of the canal. Just you'd swing over with the tire swings and plop into the canal. That was one of the most fun things. And you're right, it was dairy cows. We had lots of dairy cows, and apples were a huge thing in our time too. But yeah, the tire swings, that was a big deal.
Hi, you have a presenter that's going to do something in May to change what's going to happen with the Fine B, and I heard that possibly it's not going to make it, and I was very sad to hear that because I voted to keep it, and I heard it was very costly, and so I heard that it's going to be a shelter. Is that possibly what it's going to be? Because there's already a shelter. I'm just concerned why we need another shelter.
From what I've heard, they're evaluating a lot of different options and haven't made a decision yet.
Yeah.
So if you want to keep track of it, look for the Metro District agenda or call to the Metro District and see what the status of it is. In my discussion with my previous boss, our manager, or director of Public Works, he said they're in that process. They haven't made any decisions yet, but they're going to be presenting to the Metro District Board in May. And when I talked to our general manager earlier today, she said it could be June, but I would check the agendas in May and June. I haven't heard of what the results of this study is or anything like that. I do know those are some of the options that they're looking at.
Do you know if they're going to have any like history so that part can be preserved? Because some of the places like in Jeffco County, on dwellings, they have big boards that talk about the different.
From the discussions that went on before I left, and I was involved in many of the projects in Fine B, so I'm pretty familiar with it. they want to make sure that they do some sort of memorializing the owners and the agricultural aspects of the ranch. What that's going to look like, whether that's signage, whether that's, and please don't assume anything I'm saying is what it's going to be, but I do know they want to focus on and memorialize the previous owners and the agricultural aspects of it. I think they may want to work with the Highland Canal Conservancy and incorporate that because obviously it was a huge part of the development and the operations of Flying Bee. I do know that those are their goals. What that looks like, I couldn't tell you. So, but Jeff, if you want to check with the Metro District, either the general manager or the public works staff, that would be the best place to do it. I haven't talked any details with them since I left, so. I'd encourage you to do that. The board, I know the board loves their public input, so.
I think the pond, it's Johnny Pond, I think they call it, that's kind of to the west of Flying Bee, but you said it's part of the Metro District. Is there any plan to kind of more connect those two? Because Johnny's Pond is kind of almost inaccessible, it seems, there's no parking.
Right, and the history behind that is when Erickson started their development, there was a thought that Plaza Drive would be extended all the way through and then go underneath the railroad tracks and connect to Santa Fe. And instead of just stopping where it stops right now. So as part of the Erickson development, they dedicated the right of way for Plaza Drive to go all the way through. And that pond was a couple of different things. One, it's the very end of the ranch and the lower end, and it functions as a stormwater quality pond as well as an open water pond for fish and wildlife. I want to say 3 or 4 years ago, Douglas County realized that no, that's not going to be possible to extend it. But then with the improvements going on in Santa Fe and the difficulty of trying to get underneath the railroad, it was going to be impossible to do that. So they gave the land back to, sold the land back to Erickson. And then one of the requirements was that Erickson Development Company or Crest finish up the road and widen the road. I think once they go through all the planning, there will be some thought as to how to connect the two properties, because you're right, there's no parking down there, there's no access down there, but I would think that there would be planning to do that. There wasn't any when I left because we didn't know what was happening with the park, but I think that's in the works.
Forrest. This is about the Broncos games and a little airplane flying overhead advertising a restaurant or something. I remember those planes, and they evidently lived in one of the hangars at Flying Bee.
I've heard that too, that some of the planes would fire the banners over Mile High, back when it was Mile High. And they did take off from Flying Bee, from the Flying Bee International, I guess national. So, yeah. One thing too I forgot to mention is the Bowens actually own property down in Morrison too. They had a fishing lodge along the Garrett and Denison River, and they would fly down there on weekends as well. So his plane was more than just going up to the Strasburg Ranch. They would also fly down to Denison. So, like I said, I've had hours and hours of stories I can tell.
Is there another question or two? I can take out 2 more.
Oh, okay. And where's that at? Okay. May 4th, we get that? May 4th at the mansion, there's a landmark lecture, on the Highland Canal at the Highlands Range Mansion. So if you want to hear more about that, that would be a good place to go.
How much of the interior structure of the house still exists? The upstairs, downstairs, secret rooms and all that?
Not much. Most of it disappeared when we had to put the structural steel to stabilize the building. It was by that time the stairs were gone. Originally the plan was to kind of keep the upstairs and maybe put a nonprofit up there, but then you have some issues with public access. We would have needed an elevator would have needed to be added. So we kind of scrapped those plans and said, okay, let's just keep the shell, but the interior of the building is very poor shape.
I was gonna say, the interior, they had done a plan, and I think it was a great plan to like have the main big room as like, there's a lot of scouts and different ones. We can't hear you. Oh, they could do, in the main area, they could do like indoor meetings during the winter, like scouts and things like that. And there's, the kitchen and a big area, so they took out the upstairs. But I still think that's a really neat idea. And when you have just 2 historic structures left at Highlands Ranch, I think it's pretty important to keep on and keep it for the, and have it for events during the winter time.
Guess one more question over here.
Yeah.
Oh, I just had a little story to share that I thought was kind of cool.
This is my wife Diane, so she's almost longer than I am.
Anyway, Katie, how many of you here ever met Katie Bowen? Anybody? Okay. And I met her back in the mid-70s. She was a very, I felt like she was, okay, she said to keep it short. Anyway, she was an amazing, beautiful, genteel almost woman. And we would go over and she would be in her she'd be in her garden in her giant hat. And, you could go into the kitchen and you could smell that she'd been cooking. You go down the hall, she'd been sewing. She'd been doing all of these things. So she was telling me that her kids entered her in the Mrs. Colorado contest. And the judges came, and they decided after spending the day with her that it couldn't be real. So she was eliminated. But we all knew that was the real Katie.
Did they ever wreck the airplane when it was flying back and forth all the time?
I never heard that, but I mentioned George died in an airplane crash in Libya. Johnny's younger brother Martin also died in a plane crash. I don't think it was necessarily one of the airplanes. I think he moved by that time. I'm going to tell one real quick story, David, if that's okay, in relation to the plane. They had a friend who passed away, and he was cremated. So and his last wish was to his ashes be thrown over the Rocky Mountains. So they asked Johnny if he would do it, and he said, sure. And this, I think it was down by Gus. And again, this is in the oral history. But he said, sure, we'll do this. So they get out the plane, and they get out there, and they take the urn and dump it out the window, but they lost control of it. So it emptied out in front. The urn itself hit the tail of the plane and damaged the tail of the plane. But a lot of the ashes also kind of rolled back into the plane. So Johnny's flying with his dad or his brother, and the inside of the plane's got all this floating land vacuum. And he told that story a long time. It's just like, and that was Johnny.